Night I lay a-sleeping, there came a dream so fair. I stood in old Jerusalem, beside the temple there.
Hello, my name is Father Timothy Tighe, and this is our 184th segment of our Journey of Faith in the Light of the Cross, and I thank you so much for joining us. We look up on our screen and we see the theme for 184. The priest chronicler used lists of names to remind Israel of their covenant call to worship Yahweh in Jerusalem's temple, the same God who promised King David that he would raise up from David's seed an eternal kingdom. We go on to our next screen and we read, Chronicles wanted the people of Jerusalem to be more aware of the temple's significance to exiles, which was much more than those who lived in Jerusalem. The heroic sacrifices of the faithful exiles made them very different from the never exiled. Their heroic sacrifices gave a deep feeling of God's presence and new insight, which inspired deep fervor. The chronicler wanted to share the deep presence and sense of purpose with the never exiled. Secondly, the presence was signified by Jerusalem's temple as God's abode, as God promised David. We go on to our next screen. Chronicles begins with lists of names from Adam to Abraham, Jacob and his 12 sons to Moses, and continues for 9 chapters till it gets to King David. List of names give historical order, but also make people feel part of a great historical plan, the plan of salvation. Hopefully this made the never exiled in Jerusalem feel a deeper sense of Yahweh's call and a deeper sense of Judaic oneness when they saw their family names in these listings with the other families. We go on to our next screen and we read, Chronicles then copies stories from 2 Samuel about David, how he captured Jerusalem, and how he united the 12 tribes in one kingdom of Israel, and brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem as Yahweh's earthly abode, his presence. Chronicles cuts out David's sins to focus the readers on the temple in Jerusalem, but leaves the sins of 2 Samuel as is in the 2 Samuel book. Nathan tells David he was not to build God a house, but that out of his seed God would raise up an eternal kingdom. All the exiles' heroic sacrifices were made for that eternal kingdom. We go on to our next screen and we read, most of all, God's promise to David gave Israel a mission and a purpose in God's eternal kingdom. Thus their heroic efforts and sacrifices would be honored and rewarded in that eternal kingdom. Concern for a future goal is called teleology, the study of final purposes, and Israel had it now. And it was not just about an historical homeland, but an eternal homeland. God promises to raise up the seed of David, and Luke uses the words raise up many times in Acts. That's very important, as we kept emphasizing as we studied Acts of the Apostles. We go on to our next screen. 2 Samuel 7:12. After your days I will raise up your seed and establish his kingdom. I will be a father to him. I will not take my love from him. Your house and kingdom will endure forever, and your throne shall last forever. That was the original from the Deuteronomic historian. Now we go to the chronicler. 1 Chronicles 17:11. After your days I will raise up your seed and establish his kingdom. I will be a father to him. I will not take my love from him. I will confirm him, and his throne shall last forever. Almost the exact words. We go on to our next screen. The exiles did well because they were educated. Pedagogues, which we covered in segment number 25, prepared wealthy heirs to protect the family inheritance. A pedagogue taught Joseph, Jacob's firstborn by Leah. From that time on, Israel became a people educated. Then Moses was educated with Pharaoh's sons. The law becomes the pedagogue of all Israelites who are to read and live by Yahweh's word, which again we covered in segment number 25. Yahweh's word was a very rich inheritance, as all the exiles learned in exile, and not to be squandered as they thought the uneducated people of the land were. We go on to our next screen. Most important was the success poor Levites won. Since they could not own land, they had to develop skills which involved literacy and numbers as letters. Remember Roman numerals? They're not numbers. That was very hard to keep accounts with that. Keeping financial records with letters is difficult work, and they were willing to do it. Scribes or musicians, carpenters, plumbers, jewelers, they all could read and deal with lettered numbers. Levites were the inspiration for the average exile. Goyim valued Levites for modesty and discretion. They went back to the ghetto when they shut their mouths. No gossip. They often became pedagogues to wealthy heirs, who in turn opened doors if the pedagogue was favored. Now, the pedagogue's textbook was the Mosaic Law, and that's why they did so well. We go on to our next screen, and we read, "Far away in Babylon and Persia, the exiles saw a mystical temple in a mystical Jerusalem. They could imagine Solomon's temple through the second temple. They could see right through it. To exiles living in much larger kingdoms, the problem in Judea seemed small. When they came to Jerusalem, they wanted to see temple services carried out with zealous observance of Torah, with purity and dignity. The priests were to keep their corruption and problems out of sight. The significance of the temple had to be kept pure." We go on to our next screen and we read, "Though Chronicles edits out the sins of David, it shows mixed feelings toward violence. The chronicler seems to enjoy recounting long lists of large numbers of Goyim killed by David. But then we read, surprisingly, 28:2, David said, 'I had planned to build a house for the ark of the covenant of the Lord.' And then we go to verse 3, 'But God said, you shall not build a house for my name, for as a warrior you shed blood.'" Exiles dismissed violence, for as domestic warriors, they won their victories in places of wealth. We go on to our next screen and we read, "The Judean area was poor and had few opportunities for the skilled and the talented to achieve success." This is why the people who lived in Jerusalem were so different. "And temple appointments were made through blood connections or bribery. And Samaritan and Ammonite harassment could easily dispirit any spiritual fervor and feelings of God's presence." So the problems overwhelm God's presence like they do in our own world. "The people of Judea grew to want a kingdom of worldly power, not a mystical kingdom as the exiles. Thus the Maccabean revolt in 167, which in turn inspired zealots to revolt against Rome in 70 AD, causing the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem." We go to our next screen and we read, "But neither Maccabean nor zealot revolt received any support from diaspora exiles." They were so different even in Jesus' time. "The exiles could enjoy fantasy violence, but they were strongly opposed to physical violence, for they knew they would suffer most from any violence. Thus the gospel had greater success in the diaspora, where the temple of Jesus' body in the mystical Jerusalem on high made sense. That's how they saw Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, lift up your gates and sing, as we have the song in this segment. We go on to our next screen and we read, "The priest chronicler used list of names to remind Israel of their covenant call to worship Yahweh in Jerusalem's temple, the same God who promised King David that he would raise up from David's seed an eternal kingdom." I hope God is raising you up. I thank you so much for joining us for this 184th segment of our Journey of Faith in the Light of the Cross.